Welcome to the Healthy Peaceful Podcast, where I interview individuals on topics pertaining to the meaning of health and well-being, personal and collective consciousness, and maximizing full human potential. In this series, I will be delving deep into the ancient wisdom and modern science behind transcendental meditation, exploring its benefits for stress reduction, enhanced focus, and overall vitality. Join me as I invite guests to unlock the secrets to inner calm and resilience, and discover how this powerful practice can lead to a more balanced and harmonious life. So whether you're new to meditation or a seasoned practitioner, join me on this journey to harness the transformative power of transcendental meditation. Tune in to the Healthy Peaceful Podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Robert Keith Wallace, Ph.D., a renowned scientist, researcher, author. He has written over 18 books. Dr. Wallace is also an educator who has dedicated his career to exploring the intersection of mind, body, and consciousness. With a Ph.D. in physiology from UCLA, Dr. Wallace's journey into the realm of Dr. Wallace has been a tireless advocate for integrating ancient wisdom with contemporary scientific understanding. He has conducted extensive research on meditation, stress reduction, and holistic approaches to health, shedding light on the profound impacts of nature that govern health, happiness, and higher brain functioning. The Coherence Effect explores the profound connection between our state of coherence, mental, emotional, and physiological, and our overall health, happiness, and brain functioning. Dr. Wallace, drawing upon decades of research and exploration into consciousness. Welcome, Dr. Wallace.
Hi, Noreen. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Yeah, let me just pull up my other thing here. Okay. So today, we're switching gears a little bit. We've been talking a lot about Ayurveda, and we're certainly going to incorporate principles of Ayurveda, but specifically, you have a book that was published in 2020, and the title is The Coherence Effect: Tapping into the Laws of Nature that Govern Health, Happiness, and Higher Brain Functioning. In this particular book, you have two co-authors. One of them is attorney Jay Marcus, and the other one is Christopher Clark, who is a medical doctor. So I want to start off with, you indicate with your co-authors in the introduction that the coherence effect is the healing effect from making the mind and body function in a more orderly or coherent way, and that it is the most important factor for good health. Tell me why you chose the word coherence and why it is the most important factor for good health.
Well, the word coherence has a kind of particular meaning in physics, and we're using it in a more general sense. If you go to the kind of fundamental principles of physiology, there's a word homeostasis, which refers to the ability of the body to maintain an internal and stable condition, even with environmental changes around. So we have constant temperature, constant blood sugar. We do this because the world around us is a world in which the second law of thermodynamics, which basically says, if you leave a system at rest, it will grow in entropy. In other words, it will start to decay. So you put a car out and ultimately, depending on where you live, it'll start to rust. And this is the nature of life. Now, life itself, living systems have the ability to resist this law. And the way they do it is they eat order. It's a very funny expression, something from a very famous
It's a great
physicist.
expression. I love it.
And when you eat green food, you're eating order that's been created. You eat any food, you're eating order. In plants, through photosynthesis, we assimilate the light's energy and certain gases to create structures. And these structures are packets of order. And by consuming them, we resist the decay in the environment. So this is really one of the most basic principles in living systems and in physics. The other explanation of the word coherence is from physics when we talk about laser light. We know that normal light has a certain energy, but if we can take that light and we can create a situation, as in a laser, where all the waves of life are coherent, they are not canceling each other, but they're adding up, suddenly the power of that light increases phenomenally, so that we can take, a laser and shine it up toward the moon. It's a very powerful source of energy, and we all know that. But how can that be done in living systems? That is a very curious and interesting phenomena, which really is like a new discovery in the world. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi said that, and he's the founder of the transcendental meditation technique, he said that if you meditate, you increase the orderliness of the brain activity. Now we can measure that from EEG, and we use a measure called EEG coherence. And this measures the frequency of the waves, and it looks at them in terms of is one side of the brain communicating with the other. The frequencies have to be in phase to be coherent. They don't have to be exactly synchronous, but they have to be in phase, which means that one part of the brain has to be communicating effectively with another part of the brain. And this is a very interesting measurement that a number of scientists have correlated with improved performance, improved learning ability, many different phenomena. Sorry, can I drink something here, bro?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Is this what you mean by brain coherence? Because you use that term in your book.
Yeah, that brain coherence is speaking specifically of a measurement, which actually one of my thesis advisors created at UCLA, Don Walters, which was this idea of looking at different parts of the brain and seeing if they're communicating together. Are they integrated? And so he looked at the waves and if they were aligned with each other. And that measurement we've used extensively. Dr. Fred Travis has done enormous research in that area. And what we found is that as a person meditates longer, there's an increase in EEG coherence, not only during meditation, but more interestingly, outside of meditation. And then that measure correlates, as I said, with all kinds of improved performance measurements, such as learning ability, athletic ability, business performance. So we really feel this is a way of identifying a more optimal neurophysiological performance. So that's kind of on the level of the individual. We can also extend it on a broader scale, and we can get to that later, but that's the beginning of it. And it doesn't have a definition in terms of the whole body other than extending it. There is a measurement called EEG coherence. There's no measure of homeostatic coherence. But in fact, every measure of our physiology is a measure of coherence, because it's, when a person is diabetic, suddenly their mechanisms which control blood sugar become dysfunctional, whether it's the pancreas, whether it's the receptors on certain cells. Something happens, and you get something called insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, and now you can't control blood sugar. And when blood sugar starts to fluctuate madly in the physiology, it causes all kinds of damage. So orderliness, internal orderliness is critical. And that really is a measure of coherence. Is one part of the body communicating with the other in an orderly way? When it isn't, you get enormous problems in the physiology, as we see both in diabetes 1 and diabetes 2.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I mean, this is all about for the layperson, is how is all this going to contribute to their greater health, happiness, productivity? I'll translate higher brain function into productivity and flow, effortless ease. So that's really where I want to move
Yeah,
with this. So thank you for
sure.
that. Um, so we've got this brain coherence that's going to contribute to greater health, happiness, fulfillment, productivity, functioning. And you indicate in your book that there are individual practices such as transcendental meditation, that when someone is practicing during the practice transcendental meditation, they are gaining this coherence while meditating, and that this actually starts to translate into their everyday life. And this is what we need for our maximum performance and health. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, you said it beautifully. That is the notion. And we do know that different meditation techniques produce different changes in brainwave activity. The brainwave is a very gross measurement. You're putting an electrode on the scalp and you're trying to measure the overall electrical activity of the brain through the bone and all the different tissues. It's like putting a microphone in a stadium and hearing the roar of the crowd. So it's not a very specific measurement, it's an overall measurement, but different brainwave patterns are there for different states of consciousness. We know sleep has a very slow wave. We know waking has a faster wave. And we know that meditation tends to be in certain frequencies, such as the alpha and theta frequencies. Alpha is about 8 to 12 cycles per second. Theta is lower, maybe 5 to 7 cycles per second. Sleep is even slower in the delta waves. So different meditations produce different patterns. Concentration type meditations, you tend to see this faster frequency, so-called beta waves. When you look at mindfulness and those techniques, they tend to show theta waves. TM shows a very transcendental meditation shows a very specific kind of frequency change in one spectrum of the alpha waves. And what it shows most particularly is not just an increase in these waves, but this increase in the integration between parts of the brain. So coherence, as I said, is a measure of that. And we see this increase in EEG coherence indicating greater indication. Now, the fundamental concept here is that if you practice meditation on a regular basis, and that's the key here, because lots of people try things and they stop them, they're too hard, too difficult. The unique thing about transcendental meditation is it's very easy. And we give lots of testimonials in the book of people that have tried different techniques and why they feel TM is easier and better. But fundamentally, what you're doing during meditation is you're having a new experience. You're transcending the gross levels of thought and experiencing more toward the origin of thought as it arises in the mind. And what we know from all the research in neurophysiology is every experience changes your brain. Your brain's incredibly dynamic. It's changing every moment. Every experience you have is creating new synapses, changes in receptors, rewiring pathways. So for thousands of years, there's been a tradition which says, if you take some time and go inward and you experience these more quiet levels of the mind, subtle levels of the mind, that experience of transcending will rewire your brain. And that rewiring will be a more integrated brain. So instead of accentuating one area, like I become more intellectual, or I become more emotional, or I become, better in one particular skill, this is an overall integration within the brain. And why is that important? Because as we rewire our brain, we eliminate stresses or abnormalities in the brain, and we give the brain a chance to perform optimally. And that means, in terms of spirituality, it means we go from the normal three waking, dreaming, sleeping states of consciousness. These are our ordinary states of consciousness, to experience a fourth state of consciousness, transcendental consciousness, and from there to even higher states of consciousness. So we unlock the full potential of the brain by giving it the experience of transcending. And this is all taking place through greater coherence, through more integration. Like going from normal light to laser light, we're creating an effect in the brain where it's able to perform better in every part of life, not just in meditation, but in every part of life. So it's a very unique and very powerful approach to improve neurophysiological performance. And what that ended up doing is changing all the systems in the body, because ultimately the nervous system is the chief commander of the whole body. So you want to change blood pressure, it's regulated by centers in the brain. Of course, there are many, many different ways of locally regulating, but ultimately all the important systems are regulated by the brain. So you improve the coherence in the brain, you improve the whole physiology.
Beautiful. Thank you. Let's see. You include this quote in your book by Dr. Asad Maimandi. Human life is based on rhythm, day and night, seasonal changes, and all physiological and biological functions are rhythmic. We inhale and exhale, our hearts beat in systole and diastole. Sleeping, eating, menstrual cycles, walking, talking, and other, if not all, functions of life are rhythmic. Why do you consider this important?
I think, we've, in our modern society, we've gone out of sync with nature. We stay up late, the light messes up our hormonal systems. We're supposed to have the pineal gland producing melatonin at a certain time, and artificial light will inhibit that. We get up late, we're not getting early morning sun. We're not synchronizing our biological clocks with nature's clocks. And a good deal of research has shown that people who are shift workers and are out of sync with nature have a much higher risk for cardiovascular disease, for neurological diseases, all kinds of metabolic disorders. So that is modern society, has taken us out of sync. The foods we eat are often contain toxins, preserves, all kinds of things which upset our body. And unless we can realign our body with nature, realign our body with the inner intelligence of nature, there's no real hope for gaining health and happiness. Because out of rhythm creates depression, creates unhappiness, creates all kinds of problems. We can get away with it when we're young, but as we get older, these patterns of life where we have unhealthy habits, we're eating poor foods, we're not sleeping properly, we're not exercising, we're not dealing with stress in an effective way, we're not practicing meditation. All these things are the major contributors to disease. And as long as we don't align our habits with nature, having healthy habits that align with nature, doing what our body needs, then we just put strain and stress on the body. It's like carrying a load of rocks around. How does the body manage when you're just overloading it with toxins, when you're not giving it proper exercise, when you don't give it sleep? I mean, we know now from sleep that what happens during sleep is you clean away toxins. We have a whole system in the body that operates only during sleep, and it removes toxins from the brain. So we're just carrying this load of toxins and load of being out of sync with nature, and it's no wonder we have so many diseases. So this notion of rhythms and of nature is fundamental to life. Our heart rhythm, our breath rhythm, our brain rhythms, they all need to operate in an optimal fashion. And only then can our body really perform well. And that means we have to kind of initiate steps in our life, whether it's learning meditation like transcendental meditation, whether it's learning some ancient system of health like Ayurveda, which teaches us we're all different. We all have individual mind-body types, and we need to cater our diet, our exercise to that. So there is some responsibility we have to take. We can't just be living on medicines and, oh, I take this medicine for that, I take this medicine for that. Those medicines aren't really getting us back in sync with nature, and very often they're getting us out of sync. So if we really want to establish internal order in our body, we need to have a life of simple, good, healthy habits, which include all the basics that I just talked about.
Awesome, great. You also indicate in your book that the growth of alternative and complementary approaches to health is used by about 1/3 of all Americans. And this is primarily due to the fact that many distrust pharmaceuticals. Why, however, do you think that pharmaceuticals continue to be an integral part of the healthcare paradigm in the US?
Oh, that's such a loaded question. You could spend, 10 episodes on that. I mean, you could take the most modern drug, Ozempic, which is this very potent drug that costs a mild fortune, literally thousands and thousands of dollars. Once you're on it, you never can get off it.
What is that drug used for?
It was originally used for managing diabetes,
Okay.
and now it's being used for managing obesity.
Okay.
And in both cases, initially the insurance covers it, and then ultimately, for diabetes, especially extreme cases. But now it's being there are many drugs like it, and they use chemicals that are very similar to the chemicals that we have in our body. And there are, many celebrities, Oprah now, change Weight Watchers from just a pure diet program to pharmaceutical plus diet. So it's a very successful drug. People often find that they get sick when they eat too much of bad food. So it's kind of a self-teaching drug. You eat too much, you eat the wrong foods, your body reacts in a bad way. We don't really have any idea of the long-term effects. It's going to be extremely expensive, and it doesn't really get into the cause, which is this dysfunctional mechanisms in the physiology. So is it good? Is it bad? Like every drug, you can't just say something is good or bad, because blood pressure drugs bring down blood pressure, and a lot of research shows it's valuable. Anti-cancer drugs have allowed people to live longer. Antibiotics, when they first came out, made an enormous difference in lifespan. So you try to make a general statement, and it's hard because the drugs do have some value, but they don't really affect the cause. They're just sort of symptomatic. So you're enabling the person to continue with bad habits. In the case of Ozempic, maybe you aren't, because people literally, if they eat too much, starches or carbohydrates, they get sick, and their appetite gets lost. So in that case, it may be a little more of a teaching drug, but people who can't lose weight suddenly lose weight. So what are you going to say? Oh, well, don't take this drug. It's hard. These drugs they are in some ways magic bullets. They do affect different systems of the body, but they're not a good solution because A, they're going to cost a mild fortune. B, you never can get off them. And C, they're not really changing the underlying mechanisms. The underlying mechanisms are metabolic systems that have become dysfunctional, or nervous systems, like in the case of blood pressure. Somehow the body is so stressed all the time that it begins to read high blood pressure as normal. So they're like putting band-aids, sometimes very powerful band-aids, over a wound. They're not really helping the wound heal. And so in the end, they divert us from what every doctor would recommend. I mean, I'm not saying anything radical here. Every doctor would recommend good habits. Exercise. Not exercising, number one risk factor for cardiovascular disease. I don't care how many drugs you're taking. If you don't exercise, you are going to have problems. Sleep. Not sleeping properly. So many studies have shown that it affects our whole physiology. Food, enormously important. Even though something like Ozempic may be the newest, most powerful drug, may help people, in the end, we don't want to have everybody in the world addicted to a drug that costs a fortune and that you can never get off. And we know diabetes too, especially, is preventable. We know if you change your diet, if you exercise, sleep better, practice meditation, you have a very good chance of improving it. So all these things are preventable, and our dependency on drugs is not helping us, maybe in the short term, but in the long term, what really needs to happen is we need to educate people on what it means to have a healthy, coherent body, which is operating in a normal way. And, some of that, again, comes down to not depending on the doctor to help us in every situation, but taking responsibility for our own health. And that's why so many people are into complementary medicine, because they don't want to be dependent upon a system that's expensive, has side effects, and we don't even know some of the side effects. They want to take more responsibility for their own health. They want to know more about food. They want to know more about exercise. They want to know more about themselves. And to do that, they have to wean themselves from the drugs under a doctor's supervision and go into a situation where they create coherence and orderliness in their physiology. They get back in sync with nature.
Beautiful. Thank you. You indicate that Vedic medicine sets a higher standard than Western medicine. What do you mean by that? And there is a parenthetical. According to the Vedic tradition, a healthy person is not just free of disease, but is maximizing his or her potential and enjoying life, meaning the person is more fully alive.
Yeah, I think, when we look at the world, we all experience happiness in different forms. Happiness has become a very important part of everyone's lives. There are courses at universities that are the most popular courses on happiness. So everyone wants to be happy. So the question is, how can I be more happy? Well, we know that if your health is bad, that's one of the biggest deterrents to happiness. Very hard to be happy when you're constantly, stomach is upset, digestion is upset, when you have fatigue. Those things really bring you down. So creating a foundation for happiness in life means creating a healthy body. And in the end, that comes down to a healthy nervous system. In the Vedic tradition, they had all these beautiful techniques, transcendental meditation, Ayurveda, just included every part of life. And it was composed of a very fundamental set of healthy habits that they incorporated into a daily routine. So you never had to even think about it. You just did your daily routine and you were automatically doing the proper exercise, drinking enough water, getting enough early morning sunlight, going to bed on time, meditating. Now, what more can you get from that? Well, in the Vedic tradition, happiness can be at a much, much higher level. You have the ability to not be as affected by stress. We can't get rid of stress. We live in a world where it's all around us. I mean, you can try to go live out in some remote area and think you're going to be free from stress, but it catches up with you everywhere. It's just so much information overload, so many things going on. So the only way you can really deal with stress is by improving your ability to handle it. And that means having a very, very adaptable nervous system. You want cortisol or stress hormone to go up. If you see a snake or you see some dangerous situation, you want to be able to react. But then you want the cortisol to go down to its resting level, or very, very low resting level, because we now know that this cortisol or stress hormone, which comes about every time we have the fight or flight response, it can damage certain parts of our brain, something called the hippocampus, which is very much involved in emotions and memory. So chronic stress now is recognized as something which can cause disease, cause depression, cause anxiety, cause unhappiness. And so we need to find a way to rewire our nervous system so we can handle the stress, because it's there. But even more than that, we want to rewire the nervous system so we can have deeper and deeper levels of happiness. And that's what the Vedic tradition called higher states of consciousness. And Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was one of the first both scientists and saints to really describe this in terms of the nervous system, that it's foundation of higher states of consciousness, not some mood making, not some intellectual idea. You have to rewire the nervous system. This takes time. It takes regular meditation, something you do and you enjoy on a regular basis. And then you get a much more profound level of life. You're able to, first of all, really be unaffected by stress. This kind of experience that's described in these many experiences by great people over the ages, of having this kind of experience of bliss, pure consciousness, while simultaneously engaged in activity. A very unique experience, but it's unique to this higher state of consciousness called cosmic consciousness, and there's still higher states beyond that. So we have not even touched what human potential can achieve. We just barely have scratched the surface. They understood this, they knew what it took, and now that knowledge is being revived in a way, in a scientific understanding like EEG brain coherence, where we can all understand, oh, these are the markers of a more optimal performance of the brain, biomarkers. And we just need to work toward these biomarkers And we can all achieve higher states of consciousness. And that doesn't mean we're bliss and ease or not working in the world. Quite the opposite. It means we're high performance individuals and not losing that inner happiness while we're in that mode of high performance.
Wonderful. High performance, but working with ease.
Right.
You indicate that the Vedic tradition has many strategies for generating coherence, and that you consider meditation to be the most important. We probably already touched on this, but you call it the supreme healing practice because of its vital role in brain coherence in both mental and physical health. Is there anything additional that you'd like to say regarding that? And particularly your reference to it being the supreme healing practice.
No, I think, this is something most physiologists would recognize, that the brain, it's everywhere. The nervous system penetrates every part of the body. So if you can do something to the nervous system to make it more coherent, operate better, you'll improve every part of the body. And this and vice versa. If you overstress the nervous system, you will damage every part of the body. We understand, like the immune system, we used to think of it as separate from the nervous system, but now we know they're integrated together. And that if you upset the nervous system, then it's connected to the immune system. You won't be able to fight disease, bacteria, viruses as well. So this kind of balance, this coherence that's created between the different systems, the gut-brain axis is the newest and biggest discovery, where we now know that the microbiome, which is composed of 30, 40 trillion bacteria, and all dependent on what we eat every day, the composition of these bacteria, that has a huge effect on the brain, produces thousands of chemicals which go throughout the whole body, affect our immune, affect our brain, and the brain vice versa. It will, through various nerves like the vagus nerve or hormones like cortisol, can affect the gut. So this is a complete system. You can't isolate one from the other. And we need to reach that supreme system, that supreme level of operation in the nervous system for all other systems to operate properly. And likewise, we have to, it's not only removing stress from the nervous system, we have to remove it from the digestive system. So we have to improve all parts of our life. And that is really the value of something like Ayurveda, which is complete. It has this knowledge, and it's been lost over the years, so it has to be revived better. But it had a complete knowledge of mind-body integration.
Right. Thank you. In one of the chapters in your book, you talk about when you're practicing transcendental meditation, and actually when I started practicing TM, I didn't know what this term meant, but you use the term restful alertness.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that and why that's important?
Yeah, it's a term that Maharishi used. And in one of our first papers that I published on the TM research, we called it a hypometabolic wakeful state. Restful alertness is a lot simpler to say than a hypometabolic awake state, but they both mean the same thing. During meditation, the body goes into a deep state of rest. We see the breath rate, heart rate going down. The whole system kind of quiets down. And at the same time, the mind is alert and more coherent, which is very important. So this was a description of transcendental consciousness, that when one transcends during transcendental meditation, the body is very quiet and calm, but the mind is inwardly alert, and it is in this kind of beautiful higher state of consciousness, pure consciousness. So that was the kind of simple description of that fourth state of consciousness.
Right. Thank you. Some of the words that you use to describe transcendental meditation in the book are that TM is easy, um, that TM is natural, that the mind increasingly moves toward a blissful state. I mean, just elaborate a little bit on why those
Sure.
words are important.
Yeah, Maharishi explained that many meditation techniques didn't work because they involved either concentration or contemplation. And what this tended to do was to hold the mind on the surface level. I'm concentrating on something. Well, it can't transcend. I'm contemplating something. Again, I'm holding it on the level of meaning. TM is unique in that it allows the mind to spontaneously experience subtler levels. And the principle that Maharishi explained that allows that is that these subtler levels are more enjoyable. There's greater happiness, and the mind naturally seeks greater happiness, greater joy. So it's delicate. You have to be instructed personally because we tend to make things much more difficult than they should be. So it needs personal instruction, someone to make sure you're not overdoing it or concentrating or contemplating and just following the instructions as they are. But once you start in that direction, once you get the mind going in that direction, it goes automatically. And that's the great thing about TM is sort of this automatic transcending process where you don't have to do much work. It's effortless. And then you know you're doing it correctly if it is effortless. If you strain, you know you're probably not doing it correctly. And you have to go back to your TM teacher and get checked and get back on this effortless practice. And it's really the reason why TM works and a lot of other techniques don't, just simply because when you concentrate, contemplate, strain, it doesn't allow the mind to transcend.
Right. I know in the transcendental meditation method, there's a use of mantras, and they're not typically. Do you want to talk a little bit about the use of the
Sure,
mantra?
sure. In this tradition, which is thousands of years old, they've used certain sounds, and they emphasize that the meaning of the sounds is not important because it's not contemplating. So the mantra is a sound, and we use that as a vehicle for transcending. You're given very specific instructions on what to do. And so without paying any attention to the meaning of the sound, just allowing the mind to literally hear subtler levels of the sound in an effortless way, it happens automatically. So it's quite a remarkable technique in that using a sound that has no meaning, giving very simple instructions, you can automatically transcend and experience these subtler levels. It's quite remarkable in that way.
Great, wonderful. And I know that many of the chapters of your book, The Coherence Effect, are specifically dealing with the health benefits of the transcendental meditation technique. Anxiety, PTSD, depression, heart disease, and I know there's many studies, scientific studies, addictions, insomnia, cognitive decline. Without going into those in specific detail, is there something you want to add regarding the meditation technique and specific conditions?
No, I think that the research is there. Unfortunately, to convince the world, it has to be on a bigger scale. They're
Sure.
very good studies supported by National Institutes of Health, millions of dollars from them to do excellent studies that are highly
Could,
controlled. But in the end, in this world we live in, there has to be big numbers, and there has to be bigger and bigger studies. We're not the only technique that has been studied. There have been many, many other techniques that have been studied, but the technique of transcendental meditation has been studied quite extensively, very well. We're really the pioneer in this world, where we started this research off, and now everybody's interested. And interestingly enough, there hasn't been enough research done to convince everyone. I mean, if you look at it, I'm convinced, but that's not going to convince an insurance company, which is the critical ingredient in this process. You really need, Medicare, you need private insurance companies to say, okay, we're going to pay for you to learn meditation because it's going to lower your blood pressure and we're not going to have to pay. I once asked somebody in an insurance company and said, oh no, people don't worry about that because the insurance companies know that at 65, when a lot of these problems come about, Medicare takes over. So they're not even interested in prevention, really. Now, it's very sad, and certainly Medicare should be interested. There's such powerful research; it just needs to be taken to the next level, where there's funding for all this, because it does require teachers, and these teachers have to be paid, and they have to, instruct people individually. It's a lot to scale up on a big level. So the research is very important, something that Maharishi emphasized right from the beginning, and that's been a very good component. And I think the research we've done has encouraged enormous research in complementary medicine. We've been a great pioneer, but it's still, the drug companies and that whole world is still more powerful. And so it hasn't quite reached the level where everybody can get money that's needed to learn transcendental meditation and to make it a part of our education, our health system, because it really should be. It would be enormously valuable in preventing disease.
Right. Thank you. In one of the chapters of the book, you talk about Vedic sound therapy, specifically that these sounds or vibrations, that sometimes they can have dramatic results on your physiology, mind, body.
Yeah, it's a beautiful concept. It's there in that Vedic tradition that the sound value of something is the most powerful value. It's a very subtle sense. And they, this is in an area where modern science has just barely scratched the surface trying to understand. We know that everything has a vibrational quality. So we know that, from quantum physics, we know that everything can be described in terms of vibration of a field. Matter is just a manifestation of a vibration of a more subtle field. So this is a deep idea that has a strong basis in physics, but the Vedic tradition understood it more specifically in terms of specific sounds. And it's, at this stage, something which we can understand from a theoretical perspective. And there's been a little bit of research, but it's something that really needs, again, more research to show how these Vedic sounds can improve the physiology. There's a beautiful discovery by Dr. Tony Nader, who's an MD, Ph.D. from Harvard and MIT, where he really correlated all of the different Vedic sounds that are contained in the Vedic literature with the physiology. So a very powerful framework from which to create new therapeutic tools to help people. And that just needs to be applied more, and it needs to be understood more. It's still a very, very cutting edge idea. And, only a few people really understand it at this stage.
Beautiful. Thank you. I know in part 4 of your book, to turn a little bit, you talk about diet, digestion, and immunity, and specifically Um, Food in chapter 12, which is titled Food as Medicine Requires Eating for Coherence and Knowing Your Mind-Body Type. What do you mean by that?
Well, this is one of the great values of Ayurveda, is that it understands that each of us is different, and that it gets to a very fundamental level, which in Ayurveda is termed doshas. And these are kind of forces or energy levels which govern every physiological process in the body. And so vata is a force which governs all transportation, communication, pitta, metabolism, digestion, kapha, the structure of the body and the lubrication in the body. And they've evaluated that when these forces become out of balance, then that's the beginning of disease. And they have 6 different stages, but modern medicine only recognizes the 5th and 6th. So they have all these different techniques for detecting imbalances. And these imbalances are best described as incoherence in the body, a lack of being in tune with nature. We are out of sync with nature. And so the practices of Ayurveda, whether it's food, exercise, sleep, they're all designed to bring us more in sync, to be more coherent with nature. And that is the real power of it. It has this knowledge to prevent disease before it even arises. Of course, it has many different treatments for diseases, but the real power of it is to create such a strong level of coherence and integration in the body that the disease doesn't even have a chance to arise. We catch it, nip it at the bud at the very, very early stages when one of these fundamental forces is out of balance. And because each of us is composed of a different combination of vata, pitta, and kapha, these basic doshas or forces, that type of preventative program has to be personally designed. There are certain basic things we can all do, but it's much more effective if we design these programs for gaining healthy habits based on who you are. And some of us don't like new habits. Some of us love new habits. Some of us like to chain habits all the time. Some of us have certain vulnerabilities. We don't eat on time. There can be problems. Other of us need to be more grounded. Other of us can get lethargic. So this kind of personalized treatment program is so much more effective. One diet for all, one exercise program for all. It's pretty ridiculous because everyone is so different. And good doctors know that, and they follow patients their whole life if they can, and they design things based on their understanding of all the idiosyncrasies of that person. So I think this is very much in accord with a whole field of personalized medicine, and it is very much based on what our genetics are, what our epigenetics are, our early childhood, all the different influences of the environment on our genetics were understood by Ayurveda. And they had a different way of describing it, but basically they're very parallel concepts. So most cutting edge modern medicine is really confirming what Ayurveda knew for thousands of years. And it's just important that we create an integrated system of medicine which combines the best of modern medicine with the best of traditional medicine like Ayurveda.
I love that. Well, just a couple of words, phrases really pop out for me. Personalized medicine, catch it. So catch it early while it's still in the stage of imbalance. Coherence, because we're talking about transcendental meditation for brain coherence, which creates coherence in the physiology, but also Ayurveda being important. And really for a healthy, happy, fulfilling life.
Exactly.
Right. Um, you have a chapter, the final chapter of the book, which is titled The Spiritual and Moral Effects of Coherence. And you share several anecdotes in this chapter, stories where you indicate they're fairly typical of what happens for many individuals who learn transcendental meditation. For example, they start to engage in what you term pro-social behavior, which is behavior that's focused on helping others and following the rules of society, as opposed to self-centered behavior that takes advantage of others and breaks rules when it is advantageous to do so. I mean, there's a spectrum here of how people interact with the world. Uh,
Yes.
you know, and you know, many times we want to be altruistic, but our behavior, we're unable to follow through on our intention with our behavior. Can you talk about how TM starts to unpack that or unravel that, and that things start to evolve in a way that's more positive for the individual and the collective?
Yeah, I think the most obvious thing is if you can be a happier person internally, and you can remove some of those stresses that might have come from childhood or insecurities that came there that modify your behavior. If you can integrate your mind and body at a very high level, then you're going to be a better person, because you have more energy, you have more creativity. Everything isn't based on just satisfying your desires, because now you're content internally, and that inner contentment gives you the basis for helping others. And so I think that altruism that you get from people, that comes from a sense of they're connected to the whole. They're not isolated. And that's one of the most fundamental concepts in this Vedic tradition, is that the world is my family. So, but how can you do that if you're sick, or you're unhappy, or you're stressed, or you have, overwhelming desires personal desires you have to fulfill? It's very hard. So you have to reach a state of fulfillment within yourself first, and then that inner fulfillment then can be radiated out. And it brings out the notion that we're more than just individuals. There's a collective activity taking place here. When you walk into a home, you can feel if a family is coherent, because there's a kind of cooperation, happiness that radiates the home. If there's a lot of tension, you walk into that home, you feel it right away. So first you have to be full as an individual, and then that fullness needs to be multiplied among those around you who you care about, and then ultimately to society as a whole. So it's a very simplistic idea, but it's extremely powerful, that we're individuals, but we're also part of a collective world. And that if we're just radiating stress and unhappiness, that's what gets in the atmosphere, and that's what other people feel. We're actually hurting those around us. Whereas if we're full of happiness, if we're full of energy, full of creativity, we're always looking for solutions. We're always not only helping ourselves, but helping others. And I think, in our society, that notion is there. Unfortunately, it's sort of the idea, okay, I have to become rich, get myself hugely successful, and then I'll create a charity, and then I'll help other people. And maybe that works, maybe it doesn't work. It's kind of a possibility. I mean, some people do it beautifully. Some people are incredibly generous, and they're really doing wonderful things in the world, and we have to applaud them. But to ensure that everyone does it, it's just a matter of creating greater inner fulfillment that will automatically result in outer fulfillment for everyone.
Beautiful. You, in your book, in the last chapter also, you indicate that spiritual growth through the TM program means the growth of consciousness, supported by coherent brain development and a balanced physiology. It is more than just learning the right rules of behavior, it is developing the brain and nervous system so that what is good and positive automatically comes to mind and is all that the mind entertains. You use this term about spreading coherence, and perhaps you already answered this in your last comment, but
Yeah, it's a very deep concept that many traditional systems have. You could say being in tune with nature. Another expression is gaining support of nature. Very abstract idea, and yet it was at the foundation of all traditions. In the United States, the Native Americans, they had beautiful traditions where they thanked nature, where they appreciated the gifts of nature. And that spirit of recognizing that we're all connected, that we want to give back to nature, is really deep in the Vedic tradition. Their notion is that you can be a beacon of coherence, positive coherence. So each individual, as they grow in higher states of consciousness, can actually serve as a beacon, which is radiating out this light of fulfillment, happiness, that there is a field that connects us all, and that if you are more developed, your nervous system is able to operate on that finest level. It's as if if you think of the brain as a computer, it's like the individual computer now is connected to the cosmic computer. And that enables us to act in accord with nature and create coherence for society. Okay.
okay, sounds good. Yeah, we're just about to finish up. And I know, Dr. Wallace, the title of your book is The Coherence Effect, Tapping into the Laws of Nature that Govern Health, Happiness, and Higher Brain Functioning. But at some point in the book, you indicated with your co-authors that you wanted the title to be the following, but decided that it was too long, or your editor decided it was too long. Tapping into the laws of nature that govern health, strengthen our immune system, and promote happiness, higher brain functioning, compassionate, a loving heart, and higher values.
It's
And
a mouthful, isn't it?
individual, well, I don't know if you could fit all that on the cover, but maybe the front and back. Can individuals really expect to achieve this much with what you suggest in your book? Because isn't that what?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We should expect, I mean, the vision that these great traditions have given us is spectacular. We should all strive for it. And there could be nothing more important in the world than reaching these higher states of consciousness, because they give us an appreciation of nature that we can just barely dream of. It's so powerful, so wonderful. So it's just been lost. It was always there. Then, very difficult techniques came up. People couldn't do them. They thought they had to become recluses, go to a cave. And now Maharishi revived this knowledge and explained very clearly that no, anybody can do this. But, you have to do these certain practices on a regular basis, and everyone can do it. So it's something we should all be extremely happy this knowledge is revived and take advantage of it, because it's extraordinary.
Great, thank you. Any final words?
No, I mean, I think I'm very grateful to my co-authors who put a lot into this book, and I think it's a very, very beautiful concept of coherence is a healing phenomenon. It's usually thought of primarily as some physics term, but this is a new definition which is much broader and much more powerful in its scope.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, wonderful. And where can viewers and listeners find you?
I'm at Maharishi International University, and do you want my email? Is that what you want, or what would you
Or your
like?
website?
Oh, I have several websites. The most recent website is called biohackinglongevity.com. And it's a what you call a multi-level website. So I have several other websites on Ayurveda, on parenting, on a variety of different topics that are all at that single website. So biohackinglongevity.com is the main website that contains everything.
Great, awesome.